All right. Hello and welcome to yet another amazing, stupendous, spectacular Angular Nation event. Today, I am very, very excited and happy to be with Pawel and Igor Minar to talk about optional NG modules, the RFC that everybody is talking about, that everybody is thinking about, that everybody wants to know about. And to start off, let's just kind of give a quick welcome, and you guys can say hi to Igor and Paul. Igor, why don't you start off?
I think Pawel should start it. It is his show.
Go
First.
go first. Alphabetically, you are first. Uh, yeah. So, I don't know. First of all, thanks for having us. It's the first time for me for on Angular Nations. But I'm super happy that we've got this RFC out and we have a forum where we can actually discuss, because the biggest problem for me was that it's a kind of years of thinking, months of deliberation, and then hours and hours of intensive chats with people, and then you condense it to text, which is just even if it's just pretty long, it's still very condensed version. So there are so many nuances that you cannot cover. So if you've got an occasion to actually discuss and answer questions, that's just absolutely great.
And we'll definitely get into a lot of the details of that. But actually, before we do, for those people that might not know you, Paul, why don't you give a quick intro to yourself?
Right. So I'm a long time open source contributor to Angular, and I've got this very interesting setup where my current employer is have the collaboration going on with the Angular team, and it was going on for years. So I'm working for a company called Amadeus, and we do all sorts of software for the travel industry. So if you recently booked I don't know, plane ticket, or booked a car or something like this, there's a chance that the transaction was going through Amadeus. But what I wanted to really highlight that we are big on Angular, we are big Angular users. And we figured out we historically always had a very strong a JavaScript team, frameworky team. So we kind of got close to the Angular team and said hey, we can work together. For us, it makes sense because we understand how the framework works. We can say oh, we are missing this, or maybe we could do it differently. I hope it makes sense for the Angular team because they've got different perspective with the actual users. But what I wanted to highlight is I'm kind of super happy that Amadeus doing the right thing. Is not only using open source, but actually giving back to the community. And I'm spending most of my time actually pushing code to the framework. So I wish that more companies actually that using open source, that they would be more active actors in this space.
Yeah, honestly, it is amazing the companies that are able to do that, like Amadeus, that to because we all benefit from the work from the Angular community, and it's a very small give back to kind of pay for some of your resources, your employees to contribute. So really appreciate that for sure. Cool. All right, so and Igor, everybody knows you, so we probably don't need an intro on your side. We can skip over that and get right to the heart of the matter. So I'm really interested to know, before we get into the details of what this contains, the RFC, and what NG modules are about. There is a pretty long history. And Igor, actually, I loved the Twitter thread that you posted the other day, kind of getting into it and explaining how this has been really going on for years. So can either one of you kind of give me kind of just maybe a condensed version of the history of this RFC?
Yeah, I think Igor, if you can, just if you can unroll your Twitter.
So just I'll find the link later and I'll post it in the chat so people can see the whole history. But it really started with Angular 2 in 2016 when we realized that the thing we had and we were about to launch didn't properly work, and we needed a solution that would enable primarily the library story, publishing libraries to npm, and additionally make some of the ergonomics better, because Angular 2 back then was very fragile. You had all these provider arrays, directive arrays, pipe arrays, and people would just create this ginormous arrays. Nobody knew what in the array was, but they would just pass them around and attach them to components, and that's how components knew what was available to their templates. So we introduced ng modules as a stopgap measure, or hopefully. We were not sure. We knew that we had a problem. We were not sure if ng modules were the best solution to the problem, but that was the best thing that we could come up with at the time. But we knew that long term, or we were hoping that long term something better would come along. So fast forward from 2016, there were many iterations and different ways of thinking about how to solve the problem in a different way. And finally, this year, we had the engineering cycles to dive into this topic a little more. And Pawel did a lot of exploration. Minko and Alex Rikaba did some exploration in on a different path. And eventually, we converged, and over the summer, we built this design, and we built a prototype. And because this is such a major change, the biggest fear we have is that the design we have is somehow broken and doesn't work for some particular use case. And the solution space is so small, there really isn't many ways how you can do this. So that's why we're doing RFC. We're just trying to get the community feedback to make sure that everybody understands what we are doing and why we are changing Angular. Because this is a really fundamental change to the underpinnings of Angular, and I cannot overemphasize that. The module system and the component system is at the very heart of the framework. So changing that is quite an undertaking. So through the RFC, we want to engage with the community. We want to make sure that the community understands what we are doing, but also we're challenging the community to break this design, because we would rather find that out now than once it's implemented, rolled out, and then people come across issues that we didn't expect or we overlooked, and that would be bad for everybody.
Yes,
yeah, great. Thanks, Igor.
Break it on paper, please.
Yes.
And just to really make sure that everybody kind of understands the core problem. So before talking about ng modules and optional ng modules, the core problem at its heart is dependency management. That when you want to use something from somebody else, or even in your own internal stuff, and that thing uses a bunch of other things. I'm trying to be as generic as possible. How do you do that in an effective way? Paul, does that kind of somewhat summarize, or were you summarizing it in a different way?
So again, when you get RFC out, right? The people, there are lots of things to digest. There's code examples and syntax and some thinking process and so there are lots of details, and sometimes it's hard to see what is the main kind of message, the underlying kind of base of it all. And maybe just before talking what this the gold nugget here for me is I want to make people to realize that when you put your component directive on pipe into declarations of ng module, there are so many things that are going on, and we are so used to doing it that we might not realize it, but putting something in declarations does several things. So first of all, you are becoming part of the group of ng module, right? You can see other components that are in declarations, and other components can see you. You are given visibility of what is in imports, right? So it's kind of you configure your dependencies. But you can have also providers, which means that all of a sudden, all those things that are inside the module can safely inject things that were in the provider. So there are so many things going on that somehow what is happening is that things that got declared in ng module has a lot of context that comes with ng module, and sometimes this context is non-obvious, right? We used to we are totally fine with this mental model where when I have a component and collaborating directives or things like this, I can put them on one element and they will be all instantiated, right? I just The same with the providers. If I declare a service in a ng module providers, I can inject it in the components and directives that I've got this ng module, right? So we kind of maybe don't appreciate it on like daily basis, but there's a lot of this context that comes with ng module. And because there is this kind of hidden, slightly hidden context, I mean, in the sense that like you don't see it in front of you, it's very hard to take a component or directive or pipe and use it totally independently, right? Like, so for a very long time, people were trying, oh, I want to lazy load a component and instantiate it. And when you load the JavaScript corresponding to this component, you use view container ref or some other API to instantiate it, you often realize that like, oh, I just loaded a component without this associated context. So for example, providers that I was expecting to have are not there. The collaborating directive that I was expecting to use are not there, and so on and so on. So like there are many articles on the net that saying like, oh, you know, I would like to lazy load a component in the isolation. And so this is the heart somehow of this proposal, is just to move Angular closer to the point where we can reason about and use components and directives and pipes in kind of relative isolation, in the sense like they becoming a self-contained unit. Because today we call it, let's say, unit of reuse, but this unit of reuse is ng module, right? Like,
yeah, so, I really liked that particular line in RFC that you wrote, Paul, that currently in Angular, the smallest possible unit of reuse is the ng module and not the component. And that's sort of counterintuitive or not, it's not what it probably should be, right?
Well, like, so this is like, it kind of puts people on the failure path, like as soon as you want to kind of approach a component or directive as this standalone thing that like you would like to grab and you know, instantiate or lazy load and so on.
Okay, cool. So why don't we get into just like the basic, and we're definitely gonna, first of all, I should mention that if anybody has questions as we're kind of going along, definitely raise your hand. So I think, oh geez, there's a million people in the chat, so sorry. So let's do this. I want to get Paul talking about just the high level basics of what's in RFC, and then I'm gonna start keeping an eye out for who has a hand up. Oh wait, here, okay.
Yeah, go on.
Can you hear me now? Yes.
Go ahead.
So
yep.
So basically, what I'm saying now is that if you have the actual the component as the basis of Angular, but these are behind the scenes, are we still gonna get from you changing the approach? Are we gonna get a different, I guess, development sense of how Angular is working?
Right. So I think like there are many things to unpack here. So maybe just like let me tell you the story that I've got in my hand, and hopefully it will answer the question. If not, then we will like kind of unpack those threads. But essentially, like if you kind of take what I was trying to describe, like the component directive pipe has this associated context of the ng module. And again, by context, I mean collaborating directives or DI providers. What this whole RFC is about is to have a new type of components, directives and pipes that just cut ties to the context. I'm saying like, so like the whole story of the standalone components, directives and pipe is saying like, I don't belong and I cannot belong and I will not belong to any ng module. And by consequence, I'm not coming with any of the context of this module, right? So because I don't have the hidden, let's say, so-called hidden context, I'm communicating clearly that I can be used without ng module. So in the sense, we are introducing a new, I don't want to say new type, but like new flavor of components, directives, and pipes that are not declared in an ng module. And they are kind of self-contained, right? Like they are cutting ties to this ng module context, and they kind of come with everything they need to function properly. And because they are like self-contained, or like, again, like the standalone name comes from like, I'm standing on the side of ng modules, I'm standing alone, I'm on my own, I've got everything I need. You got this guarantee that it becomes a unit of reuse, right? Like you kind of, I'm starting a tree where I've got everything I need to function properly.
So some kind of like maybe like a library component of some kind.
Yeah, like the library is like a good example here, right? Like where you want to have reusable components, but like for application developers, it's the same, right? Like there's really no distinction. So again, the heart of the proposal is just saying, I've got components directed in pipe that don't have all the context that come from this intermediary of ng module, and by consequence, you can just grab me and like use like this.
Is it just as simple as that the stuff that you would normally put in ng modules for what are the dependencies you would put in the at component directive for a particular component, or what are the differences?
Right. So like, so first of all, like, since you cut ties to to ng module, like you have to have another way of specifying what I need in my template for a component, right? So that's why we've got this import or deps or uses field that we kind of laid out in the proposal, where in add component dot, like it's imports in the RFC, so I will like refer to it as imports, where you can specify your dependencies. But again, in a funny way, the having of those imports is just like kind of a consequence of this mental model where saying like, like I'm standing alone, like I'm not belonging to an ng module, which means that ng module cannot specify dependencies of my template. I have to have another means of specifying.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's a quick question. Seems inspired from the scan pattern. I don't know what the scan pattern is, but
right, like so there is this acronym where people were saying it's single component Angular module. So essentially, people were for quite some time saying like, oh, like I want my components to be self-contained. Like I want to make sure that I'm controlling when they are using, that there are like no, this again, hidden context. So people were saying like, oh, I'm going to create a separate ng module for every component directed in pipe. So one way, like if you are familiar with this pattern, or like we are familiar with ng modules, one way of thinking about RFC is just like having this type of things supported on the framework level instead of like
right. Now that you say that, I do remember people talking about that, but I always I never thought about doing that myself. So
yeah,
yes, it makes sense. Marcus, did you have a question you wanted to ask? Okay, Sander.
Yes, I do. So basically, the namespacing that modules now provide, given you can have like a header component in different modules that are slightly different variations of a header, you're now importing those directly into other components.
If you think about the component and its template, and you ask yourself a question, what can I use? Is like, again, those bodies in the declarations, like every directive and pipe from there can be used, and also imports from all the module grabs. So if I cut the ties to the ng module, like then the question is like, how do I specify what can be used in the template? And this is where the add component.imports come, and then you simply enumerate all the things that you need in a given template.
I must say I slightly prefer the uses syntax over the other ones. It's like minimal. I don't really care too much, but I think uses really pronounces what it is for, because it is being used in the templates or by the component itself.
Right. So there's like, I mean, we also have like debates on the name, and like, naming things, it's hard.
Yeah.
There is interesting discussion going on the RFC, people having different pros and cons.
Yeah.
We'll see. Let's like, people at large to kind of express their opinion, and like it's hard to find like a perfect name, but
naming is hard. I know.
it is.
Yeah, so Wayne's asking, could we have the RFC on NG module explained a bit? I mean, that's what we're starting to get into. But yeah, can you kind of get into, actually, maybe let's even take a step back and talk about why we went down the route of opening an RFC and trying to solicit feedback on this, as opposed to just the normal, like it seems like it's a slightly different than the normal design process for some of the stuff that goes into Angular. Like it's trying to be more public, trying to get, be more, because it's so important and that type of thing. Can you guys talk a little bit about that?
I can tackle that, and maybe Pawel, you could prepare. Just show some of the code examples, because I think it's better to show rather than to tell.
Exactly.
In this case,
yeah, I will share the screen.
With regards to the RFC and the whole process, once again, this is such a fundamental change to Angular that we want the community to understand what we are doing and why, and have them on board, or have everybody on board with this effort. And the biggest struggle for us really is that with these kinds of changes, people often focus on syntax and not on semantics. And it's really the semantics that matter. The syntax, yes, we want things to look great. We want things to be easy to type. That stuff matters. But really, it's the underlying semantics, how things work and why things work certain ways, so that the encapsulation is not broken, tooling works, and all of these other underlying things and infrastructure can be built on top of this design. That's what matters the most. And if we were to just implement this change and say, hey, put this standalone true into a component, then everything's good, I think people would just not understand what this is about and how fundamental of a change that this is for Angular. Because we intentionally made it syntactically as insignificant as possible, while under the hood, this change is very, very significant.
Yeah, and I think just like adding to this, we kind of understand or understood from the very beginning that people were living with ng modules for like so long that they, like used to them and like them for certain use cases and like maybe dislike them for others. We also understood that like there are different preferences in the community. Some people would prefer explicitness. Some people would prefer like, very tiered syntax and so on and so on. So we had lots of those discussions in the team, and like, sometimes heated, sometimes less heated. So it's important that, like people see this process and kind of participate in it. Because again, this is such a central API that I remember saying on one of the meetings, we got one chance of like making it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, let's see it.
So, tab. Let me share a screen, and then we'll hopefully see some.
And I see Craig ask about backwards compatibility. Yes, backwards compatibility is absolutely built in, and Pawel will show some of that.
Yeah. So like one of the stated goals was that like we don't, like there is such a huge value in the current ecosystem of like ng modules published to npm, or like, like sitting in your company repository or like in your application, that like just, doing a massive breaking change to this would be just jeopardizing the whole ecosystem. So cool. So yeah, let's start with this very simplest possible example, and this is one. So what you will probably notice that there is this like standalone flag. Again, like there is a syntax discussion here that is going on in the RFC, and we just don't need this exact syntax, but what we need is say like, hey, this is a different type of a component. This is this component that does not belong to ng module, and it cannot belong to ng module. It's standing alone. Like, so we can debate the name. People are saying, oh, I would prefer to have different decorator, but that's a separate discussion from the fact that we need to mark this component as being like slightly different from the component that today.
Hey, quick question on that, Pawel. Like wouldn't it by definition be standalone if you included some of the attributes that are used for declaring declarations? So like, if you're importing different stuff directly to the component, is there a situation where it would not be standalone and you're still doing that?
Right. Like so I think it's the other way around, in the sense that like the component that doesn't have imports, or like let's use the word imports, right? Like, but like the component that doesn't have imports can be standalone, in the sense that like it should not be declared in ng module, because let's say here, this is a good example, right? Like we don't have any dependencies for the template, but I might have a provider here that I need, and this provider might be only coming from ng module, which means that like this component couldn't be standalone because it has this context of the DI token and so on. So those like two different things. The other argument is that this kind of hidden context, mostly about like coming from the DI tokens, also applies to directives, right? Like, and directives don't have like they don't need dependencies in the template. So I think we've got the FAQ for this particular item in the RFC, but we can cover it more. But like, essentially, we were asking ourselves a question: can we derive the act of being standalone from like without any syntax? And it just doesn't work. The other like often question that we keep hearing is like, can I like being standalone means I'm not in the ng module. Like, so can I know that I'm standalone because I'm not in the ng module, right? Like, but it's kind of like pulling yourself by the hair out of like a difficult situation, because if I'm not in ng module, like what does it mean? Maybe I've forgotten to add it. Did the author intend it to be standalone or not, right? And or maybe some like author intended it to be standalone, but someone else comes and adds it to ng module like without author's knowledge. And so that's kind of, all those things point to the specific syntax that we need to have. And again, like we can debate the name, we can debate if it's like a flag in the decorator or is it like separate decorator. We can debate many things, but we need a marker. That's kind of our understanding of the problem space.
Okay, can you scroll down to an example that uses a component? Yeah, this is perfect.
Right. So yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to highlight one thing, because I would not be surprised if many people just took ng modules for granted and just mechanically put things in the right place because that's how they were taught to do, but didn't really understand what was happening under the hood. And this example actually is a good one to illustrate the difference, because prior to standalone, if you had this template with foo CMP, foo component, this example standalone component would have to be part of an ng module that either declares foo component or imports another ng module that declares foo component. So there was this ng module somewhere far away from this file that you would have to know about and would have to connect the dots so that we can go from the foo-cmp to the declaration of the foo component somewhere far, far away. And the connection between the template and this component was unclear because it went through several indirections, several steps of several layers of indirection. With standalone proposal, what we're doing is we're connecting the dots directly. So within the component, you say, in this template, in the template of this component, I will use foo component. So I will use the foo CMP selector. And that foo CMP selector is defined using the foo component that is being imported directly into the component. So that is at the core of this proposal. It removes the need for ng modules, and it makes the connection between what's used in the template and what it means, what is the definition of these tags, more obvious and more direct.
Right, so we kind of removed one layer of indirection, right? Like you just like one hop. Here you just like,
or multiple, because ng modules can import ng modules. So sometimes,
it's
in big
graph,
applications, right? You have to jump
Exactly.
over several hops to get to the component.
Exactly.
I think Agent R has a question about this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, basically, what I want to know is like, so what happens if you, let's say, declare this component standalone, but you still declare it in the ng module?
Right. So that's where the syntax come into play, right? Like since we syntactically mark that like it is standalone, instead this different kind of beast, then like the compiler would give you an error, right? Like where you try to declare it, because like you cannot have it both ways.
That makes sense. Did you have anything else? Okay. And then Tom has a question too.
Hey, yeah, yeah. I'm just wondering, would it be feasible or desirable to like inspect the template and do an auto import, or would there be any way for a user not to have to specify the imports if they can be determined from what's in the template? I'm not sure, that might not be possible, but
right. So like so I think that there will be like a longer discussion about like am I now forced to specify all those things one by one? And there are like different trade-offs here, but I think generally speaking, we definitely want to have this proposal integrated with the language service, and as much as it can understand what's going on in the template, it could have suggestions or like auto imports. Sometimes it's tricky. There are situations where it's tricky because a directive, for example, might match like a HTML attribute, and like you don't know, so like it will not be 100% like, but like it can do lots of heavy lifting for sure. Cool. Okay, Gregory.
Yeah, hey, a bit maybe a silly question, but there is a standalone Boolean flag. Did you think about maybe another decorator for it, or what's standing behind it?
Yeah. So like again, like we have there is a discussion in the RFC, people suggesting it could be a decorator, and it absolutely could be. So again, we are not like married to this syntax. What we need is something in the syntax to know that this is this different type of a component. We can have it. I mean, we had absolutely crazy ideas. You can start the name of a component with the, I don't know, snowman Unicode character. Like it's like I don't think like that would be enjoyable experience, but unless you like snowmans. But like this is the thing. We just need to know how we know it's up to the debate.
Yeah, and I think this is already mentioned in the RFC, because we went through several syntax proposals. I think we had at least 3 different ways of doing this. The thing that we like about the flag is 3 things. First of all, we didn't want standalone components the syntax to convey that this is a very different kind of component, because it's not. It's the very same component that you use today. All of the knowledge that you know about Angular components is transferable to this. The only thing that has changed is how the dependencies are managed. So we didn't want to say like, hey, this is a completely new component. No, it's not. It's the same Angular component. It's just how it reaches its dependencies is slightly different. Secondly, with the flag is more composable. So if we had ng component, or if we had a standalone component as a decorator that was completely different, it would make it difficult for us to bring in further enhancements to Angular, because we're talking about zoneless, we're talking about other proposals. If we want to combine, for example, a zoneless component and a standalone component, how are you going to combine that? Are you going to have 2 decorators, or how is that going to work? With flags, we have a clear path to layer these different things on top of each other. And lastly, we have a hope that standalone components will become the default in Angular in the future. And if that is the case, then the flag makes it very easy for us to do an automated migration that is clear and without surprises, because today standalone is opt-in, you can set it to true, the default is false. In the future, we can say standalone is required, and you have to set it to true or false. And once everything is required, and once the standalone property is required, then we can flip the default safely and eventually make standalone to be optional and default to true. So, over several major releases, we could make standalone the default. It's not going to happen overnight, but we've done this with static queries. If you use queries heavily, you've probably seen us do something like this in the past. We would do the same thing with standalone components, assuming that this proposal gains traction in the community, and we agree that this is the better default.
Two really good questions in the chat. One actually, and both that I have as well. So for some, like in the current setup with NG modules, there's some modules that are just used universally, common module, like forms module if you're doing a lot of form stuff. Is that something that if you did, like you're saying, Igor, we phased that out and it was all at the component level, would you have to import those individually, or is it just because you would be referencing, instead of the overall forms module, you'd be referencing a specific form component, and that would bring in just that specific stuff for that component? Like, how would it work?
Right. So there are multiple answers to this question, really. And so first of all, I think I wanted to highlight the other example where we talked about the backward compatibility or like interoperability with the current ecosystem. So here's an example where you can consume an existing NG module, right? Like, so like you just like don't have to throw away your entire investment. So this is what kind of enables this this proposal to have two types of flavors of the components working together in the same application. Now, asking, like about the future, like what happens if we adopt this proposal and people universally like standalone components? Like what do I do with the common module? Like what do I do with NG4, NGF, and so on? And I think it's important to realize that what the NG module does in this specific case here is just like act as the grouping, right? Like I'm just saying like, here I'm allowing this template to use everything that was exported from this module. So in a sense, this common module like here acts as the fancy collection of things that you can use in a component. And we can have less fancy collection. Just for example, you could export things like, first of all, you can import things individually if you prefer to have this explicitness and like you want to kind of oh, I want to see what this template is using. But you say like, oh, it's tedious, then you can kind of create your own module by exporting a collection. But I think we also discussed a possibility of putting in here in imports actual star import from JavaScript, right? Like, so if you've got the library, you would say like import star as material, and then like you would put like a reference to everything that is JavaScript exported from the material design.
But in this particular example, if you're doing it on the individual basis, you would be like adding a declaration for NG4. Is that how it would work?
Yeah. Here you would have like, we've got like NG4 and we've got the async pipe. So you would like specify. And we reached out for the feedback for this particular thing, but like from the sound of it, it seems like we will just break down the common module into pieces in the sense that like we will mark NG4 and async pipe as standalone, which means like for people that like this explicitness, they will be able to enumerate everything they are using.
Yeah, a couple people have their hands raised, but really quick, there was someone, Helen, who posted a question earlier asking that when multiple components reference a particular dependency service, let's say, would it be a new instance for each, or can you modify whether it uses the same actual instance or two different instances?
Right. So that's kind of question about how like the system works with the dependency injection, or like all the providers, and we've got like a dedicated section for it. Like let me just like quickly scroll. So whenever you see this picture, you will like know it talks about the about the DI. But essentially, when you when you like, there are two things that like, let me show this picture maybe. So it's just like trying to see like that there is a graph of imports, right? Like let's say I've got at the top, I've got this standalone. Let's say here at the top, I've got like standalone thing, and it can import other standalones or like imports other modules, right? So somewhere like if your standalone is importing a module that has providers, those providers would be just kind of bumping up to the top injector, which means we will just collect all the provider definitions from all the imported ng modules and instantiate them at the top, which means the number of instances will not change. The funny part is that like you might ask a question like, can I specify here a provider, right? Like because today a component can specify providers. You can, but they will behave as today. So those providers are on the component level, right? So here with the standalone, currently you cannot specify a provider that would bubble up, right? Like you cannot say like, oh, this component has something for the application injector. You can say this component has something for himself, but like not for application injector. And generally speaking, for those situations, I think we want to go more into like tree cable providers. So like, you know, the provide in syntax, provide in root. So just kind of, if you've got a service that like should be at the root, just say, you know, provide in root. But again, we've got this kind of bubbling up or like rolling up. If there are providers from the imported ng modules, they will just kind of bump up. So here again, if you import ng module that has a provider, it will not be instantiated on this level. It will just bump up, right? Like, so you will not see all of a sudden more instances.
Gotcha. Okay,
yeah,
that makes
it's
sense.
kind of involved, but like it's again, like the guiding principle here is that the current existing ng modules should work as today. Like they should not like break.
Yeah, I mean that's why you could use even a combination of things, right? Like you could have an ng module and a standalone component, and they all just kind of bubble up the same way. So
yeah,
that makes sense. We had a couple people with hands raised. If you guys can raise your hands again, I did see Deb Malia. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Hey, no, that's the correct pronunciation. So I was kind of, well, this is very exciting, and I was kind of thinking about the import thing that Pawel was mentioning, that somehow if we can use the JavaScript import syntax, and then I was also thinking about it would be very similar to JSX if we could use, let's say we had a component and we use the component name as the tag as well, but then I thought that would be difficult to do when it comes to maybe directives.
Right. Like so like the moment where we get the RFC out, I was like sure that someone will say like, oh, you know, why now I have to like import like JavaScript import and put something in the add component imports, right? Like you kind of like why you are making me to do this job twice, and like could I have matching on the template tags? But as you notice, like I think that this is just absolutely kind of valid question and observation, but it's entirely different project, right? Like we would have to come up with the different template syntax that that matches JavaScript import scope with what is being used in a template. So while this RFC kind of brings dependencies closer to where they used, and like you can see that, oh, I can almost match. Like again, just changing the template syntax is entirely different story. And as you noticed, I don't think like TSX or GSX would work as is for sure, because like the semantics are not like rich enough to express everything we know about the directives. And so yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's not this RFC.
And Craig asked another good question, that are child components aware of imports provided in the standalone imports, or actually even more generalized version of this is, like, because you mentioned that the all the dependencies kind of bubble up. So does it work that everything kind of downstream has availability of the stuff that is at that higher level?
Right. So this bubbling up only applies to providers, but like for directives, like for things that you use in a template, it's just like if you import it here, it's available here. It just doesn't get like added to the scope that would be visible to child components. So like you, for the template, you have to, like, I'm using full component, then I'm importing full component.
Okay, yeah. So for imports, it sounds like the answer is yes.
Yeah,
that it will be
it's
accessible
just
for
like
child.
we have this bubbling up of providers only to keep
Yes.
the current semantics of the ng module. Like we don't like want to start all of a sudden instantiate on you. Like you had like some, you know, some service that you were assuming that it was like a singleton, and now all of a sudden would instantiate it like 5 times, and probably this would be unhappy path for existing ng modules.
Okay. And Tito, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was trying to understand. The standalone component is like it's like a closure, right? So that means everything is contained within it, the component.
Yeah, you kind of create your own mini word or mini package, and that's why, like, as soon as you do it, then like you kind of communicate to the others, hey, it's safe to use me without like importing something else. I can just grab a component. Like you bring this whole self-contained word, so you don't have to do other things.
You know, we're getting near the top of the hour. People have asked a lot of great questions, but there's also been a lot of discussion on the on GitHub on the actual issue itself. Is there anything that you guys know that people have been asking about that we haven't covered yet?
Right. So like I was like today before this call, I was going through all the comments, and I think we talked a lot about like imports and like, you know, how I'm going to specify this. So like I think we had good discussion on this. I think what was interesting for me as the feedback, which I kind of didn't expect or didn't fully expect, is that some people were saying like, oh, you know, in the potential future where you decide to like go into module-less world, you are taking away from me architectural pattern. Like, you know, like this was something that I used to structure my application, and now like you are taking it away from me. So like just first of all, like we are not taking away anything, and we understand this is such a central API. This is such a concept that we've been living with for years. So like we will like move very, very carefully and consciously here. But I'm saying that this feedback was surprising to me, because if you decompose everything that what ng module is doing, in many respects, it's a grouping entity, right? Like it just like says like, oh, you know, I'm grouping directives that go together. It groups providers that those things in mind. So like if you start like kind of breaking down those responsibilities of ng module, you realize that like for some of those responsibilities, we can lean on what exists in the JavaScript world, right? Like, so if you've got group of things, then why not to export like, you know, JavaScript collection, or just right? Like we don't need to group things. We don't need Angular specific class to say that I'm grouping things. So
yeah, no, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, so I think like the what I wanted to highlight is that like there's absolutely a way, and I think this feedback came mostly about the architectural pattern, saying like, oh, you know, like to lazy load a route, I absolutely will still need ng module. And I was like looking at it, it's like, oh, interesting, because in my head it's just like not the case at all, right? Like you just like I could just lazy load a bunch of providers or like route definitions and so on. So again, like a lot of responsibilities about like of the ng module is about grouping, and we can do groups without having Angular specific class.
Yeah, and actually one thing for me actually I realize that there might be some benefits for tree shaking, that type of thing, to be able to be more, when you're more specific at the component level and you know exactly what a component is, but also just from a code organization and kind of refactoring standpoint, I know that probably just like a lot of other people, I just by default will just put everything into an array, like just bubble everything up just to make things simple. Every single, you know, pipe and component, everything just into the same array that just gets put into the same like high level ng module or whatever, just for pure simplicity's sake. And when, as things change, there might be a part of your code that's not used anymore that you could refactor out. But whatever, because it's part of this global thing that you just by default kind of add to, you don't necessarily know that you can remove that, or it's at least harder to see without kind of getting into, you know, what exactly your code is doing and stuff like that. So I definitely welcome this type of change for sure.
Right.
And Gregory, you have your hand up.
Yeah, could you elaborate a little bit more, because I didn't get it like 100%. Do you mean like using export on ECMAScript, or do you mean actually barrel imports and exports, or just stick to the basics?
Our hope is that people will start using ES modules more for this kind of grouping of things. I definitely hope that people will not replace them with arrays, just like it was prior to ng modules. There are a few things that we are looking into on the framework side to make ES modules more easily consumable within these component imports. One of them is like star imports, for example. You should be able to star import ng bootstrap into your ES module, refer to it as ng bootstrap, and then import that star import into a component, and that would make all of the ng bootstrap components available to your template. So there are a few things that we are looking into to make it easier to use ES modules, but we definitely hope that ES modules will play a big role in replacing ng modules. Yes, also default exports. Yeah, that's another. So star imports and default exports. We hope that people will lean on those more. And we know that there are some issues in the framework that we need to tackle, and those are on our backlog.
Cool. And you know, just from the community standpoint, you know, what can everybody on this call and in the larger community do to make this change a success? You know, just giving additional feedback, trying things out. What do you guys want that can help you guys to you know, push this over the line?
Right. So I think like I would be personally mostly happy if people can like kind of break this. Sorry, I'm just like scrolling to a specific place, so I'm sorry for the like break this proposal in the sense like, oh, this is totally illogical, or this will not work. I've got a use case that like you're just totally not covering, and so on. So that would be great. Read through RFC and just, you know, like, and the discussion, because I think like there are already like many answers in the discussions. But what I wanted to highlight is that like you can actually also get the feel for this API. So at the bottom of this RFC text in the additional resources, Igor actually did like, I think like it will, like I'm just like sharing. Oh, okay, cool. Igor did kind of hack to the JIT compiler where you can actually play with this API. Like, so this is totally not how we want to implement it, but you can actually have this thing that I was showing, like, you know, in StackBlitz and play with it. So just like try to think, like, so when you like thinking about the use cases, you can, some of them at least, like it's just like, again, it's not the production implementation, but some of those use cases we can actually exercise and just, you know, to get the actual feel for them.
That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't know, I was looking through the RFC this morning again, and I didn't notice this, so I'm definitely going to check this out. Very cool. Cool. We are at the end of our time. I really, really appreciate Paul and Igor, you guys coming here. This has been super, super helpful. Just for my own selfish needs. I mean, a lot of the reasons I do this is just for me to gain the knowledge myself. And so like, it has been extremely helpful. I'm sure everybody else appreciates it. Any last words, Paul or Igor, that you want to give?
I just want to thank Pawel for all the work he put into this, because it's been months and months of research and writing, and also I don't want to say arguing, but discussing, debating different proposals, different problems with the team, with several community members. It took us a lot of time to get this far, to get to the RFC, and a lot of that work is invisible. So I just want to highlight that and just thank Pawel that this has been quite a journey, and I'm grateful that he's been on it with us. So thank you.
Hey, you are stealing my line, because that's like what I wanted to say is that, like, I feel like, okay, my name is on this like RFC, right? Like, and I take full responsibility for what is written there. But I feel like I just like kind of being next to right people at the right moment, and like just like it was really we started to think about it like years ago, and like there were months where nothing was happening, and then someone would like drop a nugget of like information. So like, Igor said like, oh, maybe we should like think about it as extent or something, and someone would say something else, and like, all those pieces were kind of inconsequential, but just like put together, this is what we have right now. So yeah, like huge thanks for all the people that kind of collaborated with me, but also huge thanks for like all the comments. We've got like over, I think, I don't know, it's like well over 50 comments on the RFC. This is just pretty amazing. So thanks for this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. You are amazing. You are the man. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we will see you again at the next Big Angular Nation event. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you a lot. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Hey, Sander, would you be staying back for now, or?
I have a few minutes, so.
I actually saw your last question, that would the router be aware of these standalone elements, and would they be able to go there? So I don't know if that was answered. Did you get anything?
I know the answer. I just wish they would have said it. Yes, it is possible. It's already possible, actually. You just know how to do it. But yeah, sometimes I'm asking questions that no one is asking, because I want the answer to be known, and I don't want to give all the answers.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, it is possible, but it needs to be wrapped up a little bit different than it is now. So I think they need to put this into the discussion. I will go over the RFC and see if there is something mentioned about this. And if there isn't, I will just re-ask the question over there, because people will be concerned about this. And there are a couple of other questions I saw that didn't get answered. Darius, inputs will be available. No problem there. They are the same as every other component.
Yeah, everything would be same. I actually, but there was a lot of talk about how dependency injection works. So I guess I got confused. You can still use the services which are like provided in root, right? Without any problem.
You totally can use services that are provided in root. There is like a little bit a different thing. If you are now using modules and you're providing in this module because you want to have a provider for this module only.
Yeah.
And that is something that I wonder how they will make it available. There will be something for it, but perhaps that will be like a providing something special, or I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one yet, but I'm going to ask that question too, because that's the only one I'm still missing. You can have like a module that has its own providers or its own provider. Usually it's just one that is for that module and is shared among all the components in that module. and that can be something that would be helpful. That is like a rare thing, because most of the time you want, if you have localized providers, you want to provide them in a component, so that the component and the whole tree below that are using the same thing. But sometimes you need like 3 or 4 components in the same module to have access to the same providers. An example would be like if I create a couple of components for a table or a grid, and I have some services that are talking, so that they are talking to each other through the service. I don't really want to provide it in root, because it is no concern of the whole application. It is like for my own thingy only.
Yes.
But I also cannot inject it in any one of the standalone components, because those are not like the head master thing for this set of components. So we might just need an ng module for that. That might be the answer. Keep on using an ng module for that. And if that's the answer, that's fine. Because
sorry, I was just thinking that for your example, there would be like a top level component for, like, let's say you mentioned a table, so there probably would be a top level table component, and maybe if you are providing it in that, your children will always get that. So would we still need the ng module?
Yeah, the table is not really a great example for this. You can have like a grid-like component, and like have different kind of grid cells, where the grid cells need to communicate with each other, which still can be by the top component. But
okay.
It's more about the principle that you have like a set of components that needs to communicate between each other, without actually the need for a tree structure.
Yeah. And
if I could add, I thought you could also inject services, provide them in the components directly.
Yeah, you can provide them in a component, but if you provide them in a component, if the component gets destroyed, your service gets destroyed.
Oh,
so that is perfectly fine. If you don't need it anymore, you can just throw it away and be done with it. But if you have like a service that you don't want to provide in root because it is contained to your set of stuff, that is something I don't know how to solve that with standalone components.
I actually had one more query when you mentioned the provided in property in services. There are 3 particular ones which we use, which is like root, which is most common, platform, which I don't know, I haven't used it, and any, which would probably create an instance of that service whenever you inject it in a component, right?
Yeah, the any is a little bit the odd one out. There is another one. You can provide it in the browser, so you can even share it among Angular applications. It depends what you need.
I was just thinking that I probably have seen it in an example, but I couldn't replicate it. Is it possible, like if I wanted to provide it in a module, is it possible to mention that module in provided in, or is it just not? Like instead of saying instead of passing a string, could I pass the module class?
I think you get a circular dependency.
Yeah, I do get a circular dependency, so I guess that's not possible.
It is possible, but you get the circular dependency, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
So you should not be doing that. There are some open ends here, and those are highly specific use cases. Like 90% of the use cases you are going to provide in root. And even if you are have like the specific use case I was just mentioning, you still can provide your service in root, because it will not be widely available if you are not exporting it, the symbol of the service. Does that make sense? Out of your things, so you can still keep it internal and provide it in root, which sounds like indicative, but the class name is like the token for the injection tree.
Yeah.
So you can use the class name inside of all your components, but don't export it from your set of components. So only your components can access this service.
Yeah.
Even when it's provided in root. The only thing is, if it's provided in root, the service will always stay in memory, even if it's not used anymore.
Yeah, that's also correct.
So quite often that is not a big problem.
Yeah.
But I need to go. If there is any more questions, I can answer one more.
No, thank you. Sorry for keeping you.
Yeah, no problem, no problem.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
See you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.